Okay, hello class. This is a color demonstration that we're going to be looking at some new colors. You have the primaries, ultramarine blue, cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow medium, and I want to introduce to you some other colors. They're actually on your list in your syllabi, in your supply list, but let's take a minute to look at them because we need to see what else we can do. Now, I've shown you how to mix secondaries and tertiaries using just these three primaries, but there are some other types of primary color that we can play with. Cerulean blue hue, that's what this is right here, cerulean blue hue. It is a warmer blue than the ultramarine blue, and it responds differently when we start mixing up secondaries. There's a third blue that I want to recommend to you, cobalt blue, which happens to be a very good blue for painting skies. It mixes well with white and it makes some very interesting greens as well. And you can see both of these blues are not as dark as the ultramarine blue. The cobalt blue is a little bit lighter and is a different temperature. It's a different tonal value. The cerulean blue is much lighter, relatively speaking, relative to the ultramarine, and is significantly warmer. So that whole principle of warm and cool is at play when we're dealing with color, okay? Alizarin crimson is another red. Now there's a number of different reds, but what I'm recommending to you for our class is cadmium red medium and alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson makes some very interesting violets and also a different type of orange. And we're going to look at some of this. I just want to show you the color first. And the last one is Hansa yellow. Okay, Hansa yellow, which is a very cool yellow. It's a brighter yellow. Whereas the cadmium yellow is very warm. The Hansa yellow, I said bright, but that's not exactly accurate. It's lighter in value. And it is paler. It's a more pale yellow. And it's cooler. You can see that's cadmium yellow medium, very warm. This is the Hansa yellow, much cooler. So the next thing I want to do here is add some oil to these paints, and then I'm going to mix up some secondary colors just so you can see what they do. Now we were able to get a wide range of color, making the tertiaries and the secondaries and the tertiaries, and also making neutral tones using complementary pairs. Okay, so between the complements and the analogous sets, and then adding white to all of that, making different tints, you can get a wide range of color. We apply the same principles, the same color theory to these new colors, or these alternative primaries, as I like to call them, and we can increase our range of color again just exponentially, geometrically, just widens out rapidly. First thing I want to do is demonstrate violet using the alizarin crimson. Now you'll notice that the alizarin crimson is darker in value than the cadmium red, and you can see how when I thin it out like that, it already starts to look a little more violet. It's like a very warm violet, so it's pretty close to violet already. And when we take that and mix it with ultramarine blue, the violet that we'll get is really quite impressive. Now notice both of these colors, the alizarin crimson and the ultramarine blue, tend to be translucent when they're by themselves. Okay, so if I have just a thin scrim of color, you can almost see through it. All right, so their opacity is not that deep. When I mix them together, however, what I can get is a very deep, dark violet. Now, very likely, this appears almost black to the camera eye, but it's not. It's violet. It'll look black on your palette. If we used it straight, it could read as a black. You can even get it darker if you had more blue, but this looks pretty dark already. I want to demonstrate what a deep, rich purple it is. I'm going to do that by making a tint so you can appreciate the purple of it. When the violet is just by itself, whether it's a red violet or a blue violet or a middle violet, I refer to it as a violet. When I make a tint out of it, I go ahead and call that purple. Look at that. Remember the purples that we made with the cadmium reds, with the cadmium red and the ultramarine blue, how warm they were, and when we added white, they were kind of a grayish purple. Look how bright and vibrant that color is. That's just straight up purple right there. Okay? So that's an example of what the alizarin crimson can do. Almost mispronounced it. Alizarin crimson. I want to make an orange using alizarin crimson. I had a slight hole in the tube of my paint. I didn't want to waste the paint, so I put some masking tape around it. It's expensive stuff. Not as expensive as the cadmium color. So I'm going to make an orange now, and we'll start out, well, let's do it correctly. We'll start out with yellow. That's what we should do, right? When we're making orange, we start with yellow. So let me pick up some yellow. I'm going to use a cadmium yellow for this one. Okay. Cadmium yellow medium. If you want a warm orange, use your cad yellow. Okay, then alizarin crimson. And we'll mix a little bit of alizarin in. Again, red is the dominant color, so a little goes a long way. That's actually more of a red orange right there. So let me throw in a little more yellow. Okay, so now I've made an orange using alizarin crimson. And I'm going to make orange again using cadmium red because I want to demonstrate the difference between the two oranges. I can tell you about it, but it's not the same as if you actually just see it yourself. So let me find my yellow. There we go. I need a little more. Just put some down right there. Cadmium yellow medium. And we'll add some red to it. Not that one. And I'll make an orange. Look how small amount of red I added to that big blob of yellow. And it automatically just jumped. It went orange. Okay, so here I have two oranges. That one's made with alizarin crimson. This one's made with cadmium red. Look how much brighter the cadmium orange is. Look how much more woody or tonal the alizarin crimson orange is. Sometimes we don't need this big, bright, happy orange. Sometimes you need an orange that's a little more autumnal, as one student once called it in my class. It's a warmer, more tonal, autumnal, darker orange. Okay? Now let's look at the blues for a little bit. I'm actually going to set aside this palette and I'm going to bring in a new canvas panel. I want to have plenty of room for this. Can we see that clear? Okay. And I'm going to put my palette over here. I'll still get my paint from it. Now this is, let's start with ultramarine blue. We're all familiar with that. We've been using it since the start of the semester. Let me just throw down some more. Of quite familiar with ultramarine blue. We know we can make some fine darks using ultramarine blue. We also know that when we tint the ultramarine blue, we can get some pretty good tints. It still retains a lot of its characteristic qualities of being blue. You know, it's not going to turn into something else. It's not going to get weak. It actually becomes more opaque. So on the palette, the ultramarine blue reads very darkly. Okay, it looks quite dark, but when I put a little white in it, it's still very, very blue. It still reads as being very blue, but now it's a lighter value. In fact, we can appreciate the blueness of it. Even though it's a lighter value, we can appreciate the blueness of it even more just by tinting a little bit. And look how opaque that is. Look how thick that appears, okay? When we talk about opacity, we're talking about the color, you know, not being able to see through it. The light doesn't penetrate through the color as easily as it did when it was just ultramarine blue, even though that's a darker value. Let's look at a tint of cerulean blue. This is cerulean blue, a much warmer blue, and it can do some different things as well. Let's first look at a tint, and then I'm going to make a green using cerulean blue. So first let me pick up some white, and then I'll get a little bit of the cerulean blue, and we'll mix it into the white. Look at that. Look at what a different color that is by comparison to the ultramarine blue. It's a much warmer blue. You might even be tempted to call it a turquoise. It's really not a turquoise. Turquoise tends to have a little more green to it. But that's a very warm blue. Right? That's like an ocean blue or something. Or if you're looking at the horizon line of a sky, you might see a blue similar to that. Or a sky that's got a lot of light in it might be very similar to that. We'll look now at the cobalt blue. We'll make a tint out of cobalt blue. So I'm actually introducing two additional blues to you. There we go. Now let me back up for just a minute and show you something about cerulean. This is actually a cerulean blue hue. So it's a chemical dye. This is a cerulean blue pure. So that's a chemical composition. This is based off of mineral. And the cerulean blue pure is more expensive. Okay. Let me show you this. So I have the hue, 150 milliliter ounce tube, and then the pure, which is I think that's roughly about a 35 ounce tube. All right. Look at the difference in size. They cost about the same, roughly. Okay, roughly. You might pay a little more for this just because of the quantity, but this is, by size more expensive. They both have different attributes though, which is why I want to show both of them to you. Let's make a tint out of the cerulean pure. I want you to see the difference. It's darker in value, slightly, than the hue. Anytime you have a color that says hue, that means that it's a chemical approximation of its more naturally mineral-based antecedent, okay? Nothing wrong with this color. It's a rich, beautiful, almost acerbic color. Look at the pure though. It's more metallic and it's cooler. So that's cerulean hue, that's cerulean pure, and you just get very different results with the color. So it depends on what you want to do. In fact, I find application for both of them when I'm working on a skyscape. Now, back to cobalt. I promise you we look at cobalt. Let's make a tint out of cobalt. Cobalt blue. Pick some up. By the way, I'm using a rag to wipe off my palette knife in between colors here. Okay, so let me mix this up thoroughly. Look at that. The cobalt blue tends to be more opaque by itself. It is more opaque by itself than what the ultramarine blue is. It is not as dark a value of a blue, but it is an extremely versatile color. It's not as deep and rich and penetrating as the ultramarine, but what you do get is this good, solid sky blue. Look at that. Now, because I've added white to it, it's more of this baby blue, I guess you could say. But depending on the quantity or the ratio of color to white, and I'm using titanium white, if you needed to get it bluer, then just add more blue to it. But notice that. Notice the difference there. This is a good, steady blue. Okay? Reliable. And also a very good color for making sky. All right, very good blue there. Now, I want to demonstrate also what cerulean can do when we start making a secondary out of it. And I'm going to do two greens actually. One with cadmium yellow medium and the other with the new Hansa yellow. Okay. And then we'll go back and make tints out of those yellows so you can see them. So let me get some cerulean. There we go. Cerulean. We're going to do it twice. So I'm going to get two little blobs. Can we see this clearly on the camera? Or do I need to adjust the palette? Nope. Okay, we're good. Okay, so now I'm going to get some cad yellow. Go off camera for a minute. Look, I'm back. And that's rather dark, so let me add some more yellow to it so you can see it more clearly. Look at the green. Isn't that a much cooler green than what you made when you were working with cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue? Okay. Now I made a slight mistake. I added yellow to blue. Really, you should add blue to yellow. Remember, blue is the stronger color. That's why it's taking me more yellow to get the green I want. All right. And depending upon how much yellow we add to the green, it changes the value of the green. Really, it changes the color, but it also, you can argue that it affects the value as well. Oops, I just knocked the camera. So let me make a yellow green. Now when I make a yellow green out of it, look at that. You can really see how it's just a much cooler yellow green than what we had with the ultramarine blue. Okay, so I called this a warmer blue compared to the ultramarine blue because to my eye this looks like it's a more acerbic color, a warmer color than what ultramarine blue is. And yet when I start making greens out of it, they're much cooler greens than what I got with the other one. Now we're going to use a Hansa yellow to make some greens. And again, you remember that the Hansa yellow is this very pale yellow. Okay, so when I add blue to it, and I'm using the cerulean blue hue, look at that. Look how acidic that looks. It's like that plastic green color. Very artificial looking green color, but very bright. Each of these colors has its benefits, it has its abilities, it has its strengths. What happens if I make a tint out of that? I'm just curious. Let's see. What does it do? Look at that. Look how minty that is. Right? and still retains its luminosity. It hasn't bled down or become gray. It's just lighter in value. So that's cerulean blue with Hansa yellow. That's cerulean blue with cadmium yellow. Very warm, very cool. This would be cooler than if I used ultramarine blue. So you can think about what it is you need to do, what you're trying to do, what you're looking at, what you're referencing, what you want to say about it, and then choose the color appropriate to what you're attempting to accomplish. Let's make a couple of tints out of our yellows. I just want you to see what that can do. I'm going to take this canvas panel away again and replace it with the other one, because I've already got the color squeezed out. So let me just take this away, and we'll bring this back. And can we see that clearly on the camera? Yeah. Okay, everything's good. All right, now I'm going to make a tint with cadmium yellow. You're pretty familiar with cadmium yellow by this point in time. There's our tint with cadmium yellow. Now by adding the white, the titanium white, to the yellow, we've changed its value. It's much lighter in value. It's paler, but it still retains a good luminosity to it. It's reflecting the light well. It's not dull. Maybe by comparison to the plain color. There's a lot you can observe in nature that comes close to that. Well, having said that, let's look at the other one. Let me clean off my knives real quick here. There's my yellow knife. Let's get some white, titanium white we're using. Now there is another white called zinc white. Zinc white is very reflective. Okay, titanium is stronger. Titanium, if you get too much of it in your color, it can make the color look rather chalky or pastel-like. So I do recommend zinc white. In fact, let me just show you that since we're talking about alternatives. This is a zinc white. That's titanium. This is zinc. The zinc white is not as strong. In fact, it can flake to a certain extent if you don't have enough oil in it. But it's more luminous. It's brighter. You can see it. I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but when you're mixing your own paints, you can see it. This just has a greater luminosity to it. It is possible to have the best of both worlds. You mix them together, zinc and titanium, you wind up with a white that's brighter than just titanium and yet stronger than just zinc. And when I'm talking about strength, I mean the strength of the color. Or the strength of the paint, I should say. It's not going to flake. It's less likely to crack. Zinc white can crack if it's too dry. By dry, I mean how much oil is in the paint. And you're losing oil all the time because that's how your paint's dry. The oil rises to the surface and goes across the paints and doesn't evaporate, but dissipates. Okay, so Hansa yellow, making a tint of Hansa yellow. Look at that. That's a daisy in the sun, isn't it? Look how pale that is by comparison, even to the tint of the cadmium yellow. A lot of versatility going on there. Okay? A lot of versatility going on between these two yellows. This yellow makes that yellow look like it's in the shade. This yellow, the Hansa, it's not as deep, it's not as rich, but once you start tinting it, look how bright it is. Look how it just comes to life. Okay? Hansa yellow, cadmium yellow. Each one of your primaries can have a partner. Cad red partners up with alizarin crimson, warm, cool. Cad yellow partners up with Hansa yellow, warm, cool. Your blues, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, either hue or pure, depending on how much money you want to spend and what you want to do. Cobalt blue, highly recommend cobalt blue. Okay, you can exponentially increase your range of greens by including cerulean. Okay, and then your cobalt blue. It's not as dark as ultramarine blue, but it's much more opaque, and you saw how it made some really good tints. Okay, you can make violets, pretty successful violets, using cobalt blue. I'll just do one real quick to demonstrate. That's a blue violet. Look how dark that is. And then when I do my little test tint, watch it turn into purple. So that's a purple done with ultramarine blue. Here's a purple done with cobalt blue. Both very successful purples. In fact, this one over here, the cobalt blue, might be a little richer. But that could be because I have more alizarin in there. A tint of alizarin, let me just show you that. We know that when we make a pink with cadmium red, all right, we get this very good pink, right? It's not dull at all. It's very, very warm, but it looks kind of fleshy, doesn't it? It looks like hamburger meat, right? It's got that beef fat color to it. Look what happens when I make a tint with alizarin crimson. Look at that. Like a hot pink, isn't it? Very different color. Very different tint. So I am recommending these colors to you. They are on your supply list. You need them. Why do we need them? Well, let's talk about what we've been doing. Exercise number 3 and exercise number 4 dealt with color relationships, complementary color relationships, and analogous color relationships. The painting assignments, painting assignment number 3, painting assignment number 4, also dealt with color relationships. Your subject matter was a still life that you developed, okay? And I asked you to put it in a box so that we limit space. You could illuminate the box so that now you're dealing with value transitions, and you have a limited palette to deal with painting assignment number 3, you were to choose one complementary relationship. That's either yellow and violet, green and red, or blue and orange. And then you mix neutral tones. With painting assignment number 4, you were to choose 2 related analogous color groups. And you can look at your chart to see what groups are actually related to each other. An example would be to go from red to orange, and then from orange to yellow. Okay, all the tertiary colors and the secondary colors, well, orange is a secondary color, but the tertiary colors that exist between red and orange, there's 3 of them. And then the tertiary colors that exist between orange and yellow, there's 3 of them. That constitutes 2 separate but related analogous groups. Okay, our next painting assignment, and we're going to talk about the assignment before we get into the exercise. Our next painting assignment is going to be a landscape painting. I'm going to ask you to go out, find a location that you respond to. It could be just your front yard. And I will send you an information sheet with the assignment, with the specifications for the assignment all written out, and some examples of what we're talking about. But just to give you a heads up, painting assignment number 5 is a landscape painting, and the job there is to respond to the color that you observe. Try to match the color that you observe. What color is the sky actually? What color is the ground you're looking at, or the space you're looking at? What colors are involved actually? And let me give you a tip right now. Skies are not always just blue. Grass is not always just green. Tree trunks are not always brown. In fact, they're not. There is a myriad of colors out there. Try to match the color that you see. Base it on observation. You are not limited in your color scheme, except for this. Okay, there's one limitation. Put the earth tones away. We're not using black out of a tube. Okay, you don't even need to use a mixed black. If you need a dark, mix the dark from the neutral tones. You can mix a very nice violet that reads as the dark. You can actually make greens that are extremely dark. Let me just demonstrate that real quick. How to make a green that reads as a black. So there's a blue, there's some, I'm finger painting, aren't I? I'm going to make a very blue-green. That's a blue-blue-green, isn't it? We talked about that in the last exercise. Blue-blue-green. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to take some of my alizarin crimson and I'm going to put that in. Mix it in well. Look how dark that is. I just made a neutral tone using blue-blue-green and a little alizarin crimson. And to the eye, to your eye, that would look black, wouldn't it? It's a deep, dark neutral tone. So some of these neutral tones can get really dark, especially when you're including these alternative. Look at there. That's a neutral gray. Okay, I took some white. I took some of my deep, dark neutral tone there. Add a little white to it. I get a neutral gray. So use the theory that we've been working with. Use the complementary color theory. Use the neutral tones. Use the relationships like analogous colors to get groups of color that relate to each other. Match your color. Don't depend on black. Don't depend on earth tones. Make it yourself. Okay, this is my color demonstration. Get yourself some alizarin. Get yourself some Hansa yellow. Get yourself a good cerulean blue. I highly recommend them. Get yourself some cobalt blue for the skies. Look at that beautiful color. And again, number 5, painting assignment number 5 will be a landscape painting. You choose your own locality. I will send you a detailed information sheet going over this process again, step by step. In fact, I'm working on that now. Should have it out to you pretty soon. And this is the demonstration. Spend a few nickels, okay? Skip lunch for a day or two and buy yourself some paint. Get yourself some good paint. Okay, that's it for now.